text for this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew. It is a continuation of the conversation that we explored last week. In Matthew 16, Peter gives a good confession of faith after Jesus asked him who he is. Who do you say that I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus pumps Peter up. He goes, you're absolutely right. This is not revealed to you by humans, but by God. And so this faith that you have, you're a rock. This is the foundation that my church will be built on. So Peter had to be feeling really good. Now, this conversation continues. This conversation takes place immediately following that amazing confession of faith that Peter made. I'm going to read from the 21st through the 28th verses of Matthew 16. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this will never happen to you. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and then follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good is it that a man should gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? For some reason, I remember that ever since I was a little kid, that one always kind of screamed at me. What gain does a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his soul? Verse 27, for the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I want to pose the question today. Are you a generic Christian, or are you a disciple? Maxine Dunn, who's a Methodist minister, straight talking, profound thinking preacher. She was following a man on Poplar Avenue in Memphis, and she read this bumper sticker, and I like to read bumper stickers too. I will never have one on my vehicle, but it's amazing how I like to read them because they do give a message. Sometimes I want to egg the vehicle. Sometimes I want to shake that person's hand. It's amazing how that messaging does get across. But this was a message that like she had never seen before. It said, I'm a generic Christian. I'm a generic Christian. And then parentheses underneath it, kind of like the Christian church disciples of Christ. Lots of people call us people of the parentheses. I don't know how to spell that word, by the way, parentheses. I had a teacher who said, never use a word that you cannot spell. I would still be stuck with Sally, Dick, and Jane. They would be good company for me. And then in parentheses, the bumper sticker said, ask me what I mean. And so she followed this vehicle a while, and luckily the gentleman turned into the gas station, and she asked him what he meant. And long story, but he was a church member. He was tired of all of the denominational squabbling and all the competition and the cutthroat things that churches, the bad mouthing that people do. And he said he was tired of all that. and he just wanted to be a generic Christian. That's what he meant by it. We would call that non-denominational. And Christian church folks, when I was a kid in the centrist group, it was really hard to explain what that was. Now non-denominational is vogue. Which is ironic though, because to say you are not a denomination denotes you from other faith groups, thus you become a denomination. And there are different definitions of that. After that encounter, she thought to herself, but I wonder if we don't have too many generic Christians and not enough disciples. By the way, that came from a Methodist, not a disciple of Christ person. So here we have Jesus in the height of his popularity. He is healing the sick. He's exorcising demons. He even has trouble getting off to be alone by himself. By the way, that take time to be holy hymn that we sang today, it simply means setting aside an intentional space and time to be connected to God intentionally. Holy means separate. It also means separated for service. Take time to be holy. Jesus didn't even have time to be holy because he was doing the work of ministry so much. The people were flocking to him, and his followers were riding on his coattails. Yeah, so what? They didn't understand more than half of what he was teaching. But he did talk about kingdom. He talked about a new kingdom that he would be the head of. And like any other political groupie or someone who's appointed or working for a campaign, they were hoping for positions of power. The appointed positions that always take place when your candidate wins. That's what they were banking on. I'm not making this up. We have conversations. They had conversations about it. They had disputes about it. And we get some snapshots of those disputes. Who's going to sit at your right hand when this kingdom comes? Everything was running so smoothly, the disciples thought. Peter then makes a statement. This statement that seems so obvious to us, but it was also so profound, and it was prophetic. It was from God. And he calls him the rock. Who doesn't like the rock? I even like the rock. And then he makes this statement to them. He announces. And he speaks to them so plainly. And they still didn't understand. He began to explain how he would have to go to suffer the hands of the Pharisees, teachers, and scribes. And then he would die. And then on the third day, he would be raised. Now, it's easy after the fact to judge them. But they weren't ready to hear it. And that happens to us all the time. We can hear things, but we don't receive the message because our hearts or our psyche is not ready to receive it. And this was so big. This was beyond a diagnosis. This was ruining every dream that they had. This was blowing up every expectation that they had. I would imagine that maybe some of Peter's response, since he spoke up, pulled him aside, and the way I picture it, he pulled him aside, but then he was probably, because of his words, was talking emphatically. This is never going to happen, Jesus. This is not the plan. God forbid that this ever happen. We won't allow it. And he may have pulled him aside, but I have a feeling that he was saying it to him in a way that the other disciples could hear exactly what the conversation was. By the way, that's an effective communication ploy. And we do it all the time when we say things Sometimes we do it impaired to do. You say things to one child because that's the teachable moment in their action, but you say it for the benefit of everyone who is there. That's also why gossip is so deadly and also effective, because usually gossip is kind of whispering, and you have to intentionally focus in on that tidbit of news. And that's what was happening here. And then Jesus says the direct, maybe harsh words to Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Isn't it amazing how we get connected by phrases that we've heard from the past? Maybe it's a term of endearment, or maybe it is something that was derogatorily said to you when you were a kid. When you hear that phrase or those words, you immediately can become transported back into that time when you heard them. And by the way, you can also feel exactly the way that you felt. And for most of us, it was when we were children. This is eerily familiar to Jesus when he said the exact same words as Satan, "Get thee behind me, Satan," when he was being tempted. Peter was basically doing the same temptation, that you just need to bypass all of this hard stuff and move on to the good stuff. Isn't that the prayer that most of us have prayed before? I want to bypass the hard and I want to go on to the good. Only good. It does not happen in this life. This is an opinion. You think Jesus maybe cringed, maybe instinctively said that as he was reminded of the temptation that he had gone through with Satan? Another irony then, Jesus prays the exact same prayer in Gethsemane. Lord, if there's any way at all, only he puts it in a different way. Not my will, but your will. But if there's any way I can bypass this hard stuff, let it happen, please. But not my will, what your will is. Jesus told Peter that his thoughts were the thoughts of men and not of God. Get thee behind me. It sounds like he's saying, get lost, Peter. He's not. He's literally saying, get behind me and follow me. That's what a disciple is. The way Paul put it, imitate me the way that I imitate Christ. That's what a disciple is. We are imitators of the original. And that call of Jesus still is issued today. That's the first point, and for the sake of time, I'm going to move to the second point. The second point is, most of us know that we are called, but there's always a cost that is involved when we strive to be Christian, when we strive to do the right thing, when we strive to follow Jesus. And by the way, the question really isn't what would Jesus do, because obviously we could never possibly do exactly what Jesus did. The question is, what would Jesus want me to do? What would he want us to do? That's the real question. And it's different for every single one of us. William Hinson tells about a man who was in a real dilemma. This is a businessman talking to his pastor after he became Christian. And he said, I had this problem. I've been involved in, I would call it a price fixing scheme. I know people in the Omaha area who have done things like this, but bigger companies, even though they're supposedly competitors, they get together and they stick to certain prices. And this keeps smaller companies from making any kind of attempt to even try to get the bid. So these companies would always get the big jobs. And it was price fixing. It is against the law if it can be proven. And he said, I'm a Christian now. I just can't do that anymore. Problem is, if I tell guys I'm not going to do it anymore, they're probably going to try to put me out of business. And that's exactly what happened. He made the decision not to cooperate anymore. And not only went out of business, he went bankrupt for doing the right thing. He followed his Christian principles. So that's the question. Should he have been satisfied with being a generic Christian or being a disciple of Christ? 2 West Point cadets, different talents, different abilities. They were friends all through that college. And there are standards in which you have to accomplish, not only with your mind, but also there are physical standards as well. Even to get into West Point, I looked up what those standards were, and there's push-ups, sit-ups, all these different things, which I was amazed at how low they were, but that's beside the point. And you had to be able to run the mile to graduate. To graduate too, you had to pass these certain standards. To get in, the 2 miles you had to run, if you were a male, 14:30, if you were a female, 17:20. I did that when I was in 4th grade. 2 miles. That's a long time, especially for these guys who are in shape. But he had a friend, and many of us are not long distance runners. That's kind of a gift thing, I think. At least that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But he was good at the 2 mile, but he made the decision he was gonna help his friend pass this test. Otherwise, he would not graduate. So the 2 mile run began, and he was encouraging his buddy. And if you've ever run long distance at all, that sick, trotting feeling, it feels like your feet get really, really heavy. And you have to think about every step that you take. And he was encouraging, you can do this, we got this. And he ran with his buddy the 2 miles. And they finished together. And they both failed the test. He had to train again, and he had to wait months before he would be eligible to graduate. I bet you thought that the story was going to be, and they both won the race and passed the test. That is not real life. Real life is when you want to do the right thing, when you want to help another person, there's a cost that's involved. The expression that I heard many years ago that I didn't know what it meant at the time, no good deed goes unpunished. That's part of the price, the cost of discipleship. Thirdly, though, the third point, and I'm not Jesus, but the third point is it's worth it. It's worth it. Jesus made one of the great paradoxical statements to Christian people. For those of you who want to save their life will lose it, and those who will lose their life for my sake will find it. I think that means different things to different people. It's an intense, out there statement. It's a statement of faith. It's an invitation. It's a command. It is a truth. And we all have to discover that for ourselves. Valerie Place is a name that you will never hear. But she recognized that the worldly standards of her profession, she was a nurse, she was helping a lot of people, but she wanted to do more. And so in the early 90s, she went to Somalia to care for some of the poorest people on earth. She even started a school there where not only hygiene and health were emphasized, but they learned mathematics and reading skills. Well, she was killed outside of the school that she started by armed bandits in Mogadishu in 1992. And her family didn't understand why she wanted to go. And if I was her dad, I would be in the exact same place. Why would you want to go? But she understood that phraseology of Jesus. She understood that invitation of Jesus, that call. Jesus invited her to be a disciple. She was no generic Christian, but she was the epitome of what a disciple is. And so the question is, how about us? What category do you place yourself? Generic Christian? I think there used to be that white label that went along with that. Or do you want to be a disciple? Those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for Christ's sake will find it. Amen.